Hello, Sure Babe listeners. Welcome back. This is episode 42. I am so pumped because today I am interviewing my first Bachelor Nation guest, Taylor Nolan. She was a contestant on the season with Nick Viall, and she went home on a 2-on-1 date, and she educated the world about emotional intelligence. Yes, you know who I'm talking about. She was also on Bachelor in Paradise, and she's endured 2 public breakups. So with that, she shares very vulnerably and openly on the podcast today about the trauma of all of that, how she picked herself back up and is owning her authentic self. I am so excited for you guys to listen to this because after I interviewed her, I just kind of felt way more confident about who I am as a person and cared less about what people think of me. Because I feel like when we care too much about what other people think, we don't live into our true callings. So today, I hope that it encourages you to really hone in on who you are as a person, to not be ashamed of that, to love yourself, and to follow after what you're supposed to do in life. So I'm excited for you guys to listen to Taylor's story today, and hopefully she encourages you just as much as she encourages me. So without further ado, here is Taylor Nolan. Hello, Sure Babe listeners. I am so excited today. I know I say that every time before I start a podcast, but I really am excited to talk to Taylor Nolan. She is a mental health counselor, and she might be possibly more known for being on The Bachelor. She was on season 21 with Nick Viall, and then she was on Bachelor in Paradise season 4. And we're going to talk today all about everything. We're going to talk about mental health. We're going to talk about toxic monogamy, anxiety, and how to grow with gratitude. But without further ado, I just want to welcome Taylor to the podcast. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and I love talking about all these kinds of topics. So thank you for valuing them like I do, and using your platform and your space to talk about these things. So thank you.
And also I should have mentioned, she has her own podcast called Let's Talk About It podcast, where she talks about all different topics, like from sex, relationships, anxiety, emotional and hormonal eating, racism, you name it. She is an open book, and I love that about her. And if you follow her on Instagram, you will see that as well. Like, you are getting the real deal when you see Taylor Nolan. So that's why we're having her on today.
You're so sweet. Thank you. Yeah, I try to cover a plethora of categories and topics, and it's definitely like no topic is off limits. Like anything that makes people feel uncomfortable or like is taboo, I'm like, let's talk about that.
I love that. That was my first impression of you when I was watching The Bachelor, and I was like, this girl is spicy. I like her. I was like, she is talking about emotional intelligence, and like, yes. I could tell that you were just like above. I mean, this sounds bad, but I'm like, you were just like way more intelligent than a lot of the other women on that episode. And I was like, they just don't know what that means. But you were trying to explain emotional intelligence. I think that might be one of my favorite moments on The Bachelor.
It's interesting. I definitely realized that, I was living a bit in a bubble in my personal life, before going on the show, that phrases like emotional intelligence were very common and just made sense, and like hadn't ever really been anything I'd had to like explain to anyone before. And I had never really met someone that like didn't know what that meant. And so in my head, in that scenario, I was just like dumbfounded and was just like so taken aback by that it really was like a moment of like, wow, Taylor, you've been in quite a bubble actually. And, I think it's difficult. Like, people are definitely smart in their own ways. There's all different kinds of intelligence. And, there were many other women on my season who, would have understood that term and got that term. And I think it just, for me, in a way, it was like a humbling, like, oh yeah, like, remember, Taylor, not everyone has gone to school for counseling and psychology. Like some people, these terms are not familiar with. And, it was actually really surprising to me, the feedback just like overall from America, that like most of Americans like questioned whether emotional intelligence was a thing. And my friend actually like looked at the Google Analytics of like the search term emotional intelligence on Google, and it was like the highest it had ever been in like the last decade after that episode aired, which was just like so crazy to me. But it was quite an experience.
I bet. I just love that you were just an example of like a really strong, intelligent woman. So I think that kind of broke the mold of the stereotypical, I think, female that we would think that went on that show. And so I think that you represented a lot of other women out there. So
yeah,
in your definition, what is emotional intelligence?
In my definition, emotional intelligence is really just being aware of your emotions, understanding how they work, understanding why you feel certain ways, and being able to communicate that. There's kind of an extension of it that is like being able to pick up on other people's emotions as well. But really, it's to me, it's like, it's so self-explanatory. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, like just being aware of your emotions, and, which again is sad, because I think most people aren't really taught even how to do those things. Most people aren't taught, how to identify their feelings, how to cope with them, how to use, the emotions that are really difficult to your advantage, how to, be resilient in those, and how to cope with things when things are tough. Unfortunately, we're not really taught those skills. And so a lot of this might sound scary, and it might sound like this really big thing, which is what IQ sounds like to me. Like emotional intelligence, EQ, to me, I'm like, oh yeah, like that's so fun. But like IQ is like terrifying to me. And I think one of the great things about EQ is that it's not like IQ in the sense that it's like you either have it or you don't, that it's like, this is kind of what it is, and this is kind of what it's going to stay. Like EQ is something you can grow, and, something you can develop over time. And I think it's always like a learning process. Like, yeah, you're not always going to be like the most emotionally intelligent person. Like, you're going to be human. You're going to have your slip ups. Like, you're going to have times where like you can't identify what you're feeling, and that's going to be really difficult. But, certainly as you practice more of those skills, and, take courses or go to therapy, or just surround yourself with people who are, kind of into that emotional internal work, then, the more that you're developing those skills and can be more emotionally intelligent.
I agree. And I feel like there are different phases in life that you grow in that area. And like you said, there are times where you can't be as emotionally intelligent because of, I don't know, maybe it's even just hormones. I know when I'm pregnant, I am like not very emotionally intelligent.
Yes.
But
totally. You could be super biased in a situation too, where like, you're so subjective in something that like you really just can't see the reality of what like you're experiencing. Yeah,
exactly. And maybe you're in it and you're not out of it yet. You haven't really learned from it yet. So give yourself a break, basically, if you're not able to identify a situation and talk about your emotions in that yet. So I want to know, like, what was it like being on The Bachelor and Bachelor in Paradise, and also being a therapist? Like I recently said to you before we started recording that I'm so fascinated with people that are multi-hyphenated or multifaceted people, meaning they do lots of different things, or they combine different jobs that you wouldn't know went together. And I remember when I kind of started blogging more than actually seeing clients, it was like I didn't even tell people that I blogged. I would just always say, oh, I'm a marriage and family therapist, because in my mind that was like more prestigious, and I went to school for that.
Yeah.
But blogging and being creative and having a voice meant so much more in those moments to me, because it was me combining everything that I love and am. So basically, what did you learn from being on The Bachelor? And then how do you bring that into your life today as a counselor?
Yeah. Well, first, I love that you shared your own personal experience with that, because I would say many parts of mine can relate to that. I mean, first I'll say that going on the show itself, you know, it for sure is an exaggerated one-dimensional version of who you are. You know, it's interesting even that, you know, hearing feedback that like you got to see someone like my sassy side. And I'm like, yeah, like I am really sassy, but like there are like so many other parts of me. And one thing that was difficult for me going on the show was that, you know, I didn't really anticipate, like I knew that they would have my job, you know, my career title up there of a mental health counselor, but I really didn't think that people would actually judge me so harshly with everything I did against the basis of being a mental health counselor. Yeah. And so one of the biggest things that I learned from the show was that this stigma that we have around mental health and people who struggle with mental health is also extended to those working in the helping field, working to destigmatize mental health, that we are also included in this stigma where we are pushed against this standard that is so unrealistic and that is so dehumanizing in a lot of ways, that society has this, you know, kind of schema of what a therapist and what a mental health professional should look like. And that it is totally just this, you know, it's almost this like Freud, like that's people's like first thing that they go to, right? Is like, you know, you're going to be this super professional, like very to little no personality, and just like sit there and be able to handle everything so perfectly and so professionally, and just be this like I've called it like a empathy robot, where like you're just completely empathetic in every situation you're in, and you know how to read people and can handle every situation perfectly. And to me, you know, obviously being on the show itself was a huge learning experience. And I struggled in so many ways, from letting go of control to even just, you know, being around completely different people that like in everyday life I would never be around, to losing contact with my social support, to all these things that are just so outside of your comfort zone, that, you know, already that in and of itself is such a deep, like intense learning experience. And then to also be judged as like, I'm supposed to be this professional who like gets everything right, was like really twisted to me. And, you know, coming off of the show, I always kind of thought, yeah, like I'm not going to play that much of a role in the show. Like, yeah, like, you know, I went home on the 2-on-1 or whatever, but like, no one's really going to pay that much of attention. Like, to me, I think there's a deeper layer to this of, you know, the fact that I am a person of color, and the fact that, basically, you know, the person I went home against was a very, very privileged white blonde woman that was super entertaining to America. And for me, coming back home and, you know, seeing how everything kind of played out and whatnot, like, was really difficult. Like super, super difficult. Like literally in therapy, like multiple times a week, because it was just so many layers to handle. And after that, I for sure felt like I had to pick, like, okay, I either just completely go under the radar and like somehow, you know, get my emotional shit together and like try to just go back to doing therapy, or I now have this like public persona that I didn't think at all would get handed to me, because I've never seen, you know, people like me be in any kind of like position like this. Like even getting on the show, I'm like, wait, what? Like this is happening to me? Like, are you sure? Like you don't want like these other girls? And so it felt like I had to pick, like, okay, I either am now this person that's like in the spotlight, or I just try to like go under the radar. And for a while, that decision was kind of just made for me, in the fact that I was traveling a lot. I was dealing with my own kind of emotional, personal experience, to where I couldn't really be there to be reliable and be present with clients anyway. And so, you know, that part was just kind of made for me, but it still felt like, well, wait, this is still something I want to do. And like, can I do both, you know? Yeah. And so like I started the podcast to like kind of help me to be able to reach back into that, mental health field and just like talking about those kinds of topics where on Instagram you can only talk about so much. And so, yeah, it wasn't until this past May that I now have gone back to seeing clients. And it was a really, in a way, super freeing experience to be like, yeah, I am going to do this. Like, I can be a public person. I can host a podcast. I can be my, sassy, quirky, goofy, sexual, social justice, like mental health, all of these parts of myself I can be, and I can still also be a therapist. So it's a very like, I don't know, I've ranted about this a lot, but it's not easy because people do want to just make sense of you in one area,
Right.
know, and it's easy for people to just be like, she's this, she's that. Mm-hmm. But we're a lot of things.
I love that. I love that you said that because I mean, I've struggled with that too. Just would I do better if I picked one? Do I just need to focus? And I think I was talking to my own therapist about that and like how I am and my personality is just like, I have this idea and I go after it and I do it. And then I'm like, oh, but should I just be more professional about it and just slow down? Yeah. She's like, Chrissy, that's not you. She's like, it's a gift to be you and just go after it and do it. And I was like, wow, it gave me so much freedom to just be who I am and to not criticize myself. So I love that you're owning yourself and saying, I can do both. I can be a public person. I can be a counselor. Side note, had a message from someone who said, hey, I'm just curious how this whole blank slate as a therapist thing works out for you while you share your life on social media. And I thought it was actually a really good question. And I said, well, I'm really glad you asked that. And I was like, in session, I'm, of course, always trying to understand my client and, check myself at the door and not bring in my own biases. But I said, I've always been the type of therapist that's just like, here I am. Here's my life and my heart, and I'm walking with you through this. And I'm just not that type of therapist who's not going to share about their life. I'm not a robot, like you said. I'm not an empathy robot. So I think that in the world of therapy, there is like room for change in that, you can still be highly ethical and still not be a robot and have your client know about you. And so, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the same empowerment and, freedom in a way and empathy that your therapist gave to you of saying, that wouldn't be you being you, like you can just be you. Yeah. That is like the same thing that I want to give to myself. Like I give that to my clients. Why can't I also give that to myself? And I think, self-disclosure, I think that's where people get really tripped up in terms of like, can you be a public person and, talk about whatever and show these parts of yourself and still be a therapist? Because what if your clients find out? And it's been interesting, actually. The clients that I've worked with since May have never brought it up. It has not been a thing. They're not clients that I've gained from Instagram. I have a full social media disclosure that I go over where I do say that I, do some work in the media. And so, if these things are to come up, like this is, how we can talk about it. And, there's benefits and there's disadvantages, ways that like, if you were to try to follow me on any kind of social media or, public media platform, that could be damaging to our treatment. There's ways that could be positive as well. And just going over all of it with them, I think it's been super helpful. And I think what people often forget is like therapy is not about your therapist. Right. Like clients are not coming into therapy to like talk about their therapist. And if they are, then that's a reflection of where they are at. And it's the therapist's job then to reflect that back. And it's questions like, okay, well, what does this mean for you? Like, it's not like me sitting here and having to explain my life. It's okay. Yeah. Like, you saw this post that I made, like, what did that bring up for you? How does that make you feel about, our work together, and, discussing things like that, to where, for me, anything I put out there is going to be authentic to myself. And the only time that I would feel like unsure or like in a really difficult position with a client, if they were to bring something into session, would be if it was something that I wasn't good with myself. Like, a client could go out and they could find out I was engaged. They could watch, the emotional intelligence thing. They could find out I was on The Bachelor, like, whatever. Like, okay, yeah, that's a part of my life. That's part of what I've, experienced. Like, how does that make you feel? Not to do super, basic therapist question. How does that make you feel? But really though, like, what does that bring up for you? And so, certainly not every client is going to work with every therapist. Like, there are people that I'll do really fantastic work with, and there's people that, like, we probably would not mesh very well. And that's not to say that I'm a bad therapist or that person's a bad person, but, like, it doesn't always click, and that's okay. Like, you're still a professional, and yeah, it's.
So I have a question. Yeah. You sound like a very authentic person, and you come across as that. So, and which I think is as a characteristic that a lot of people crave and want in their own lives. How did you become that way? What was, like, some of the things that have helped you to become just like, this is me, I'm going to be authentic, and I'm owning it?
Yeah. Oh, I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. I think part of it, my mom, like, always jokes that I came out of the womb talking. Like, I've been talking literally since I was born. And, I think I'll be honest and say there's definitely times where I struggle with it, and where I, feel like I make myself really small, like, to make other people feel more comfortable, because I do have a really bold, like, big personality. And when I'm not, I think partially even on the show, I was still trying to be, like, high road, like, I'm going to try to handle all of this really perfectly. And I really held back a lot of just, like, my true feelings and everything, because I was, like, trying to be very intentional about, like, not hurting people's feelings, or, like, not coming across a certain way. And at the end of the day, I think what's helped me really just own my authentic self is letting go of all of the shits as to what people might think of me. Because at the end of the day, people will always find something. And in that's about them, not about you, A. And B, that I would rather, again, put something out there that is authentic, that I can stand by, if met with criticism, than to be then met with criticism and have been like, well, wait, but that actually wasn't me. And that wasn't actually, like, what I really feel. Like, I was just, blah, blah, blah. Like, I would rather be able to just stand by that. And, I guess in a cheesy way, like, have people not like me because I'm being me, than, like, not like me because I'm trying to be something else. And I don't know. I think it's just been a lot of therapy, and a lot of me, in some ways, just being so stubborn and wanting to, like, push back on all of the people and society, that is trying to tell me that, as a young woman, I should be this, as a young woman of color, I should be this, as a therapist, I should be this, like, as a girlfriend, I should be this. Like, part of me really likes challenging the norm and feeling like, okay, you're trying to put me in this box. Like, actually, what if I explore this? Like, I think in some ways, I'm like, I don't know how true this is or not, but I'm half black, half white, which is, opposites, black and white. And part of me feels like just at the corest of my core, the deepest core that there is of myself, that, I hold opposites naturally. And one of the best examples that I give on that is like, okay, I'm going to Johns Hopkins, I'm like in my early 20s getting my master's in clinical mental health counseling. But when I'm not in school, I'm working as a promo girl at the Hustler Club and like in a strip club that are like two of the like most opposite things, right? Of like, yeah, you would expect that like if I'm going to this, prestigious school and getting this degree that I would be like doing these things. But here I am, I'm like, well, you know what? Actually, what if I go do this? Like, can't I still do both?
Yes. Oh, I love that. What a beautiful
So I'm like,
to look at who you are. I just love that.
Yeah. And I think it's also just like being true to myself and all the different stages of my life, like in my early 20s and wanting to, do a boudoir shoot and like learn how to feel more comfortable and sexy in my body, but also being a therapist that doesn't take away from me being a professional, that it's me giving myself the freedom to explore all the different parts of myself, regardless of how they might contradict each other, while still being aware of the fact that they do contradict each other.
I'm just going to be really real. I literally just did what I call a sexy marital shoot with my husband. And my friend, she like specializes in this now. She says that her career now is all about like helping women come into their own and just photograph them feeling sexy. So she's like, Chrissy, you need to wear that sexy bathing suit your husband bought you. It's like very, very cheeky and a white tank top. And she like made me take my top off underneath it. And I was like, okay, I'm at the beach with my husband. My kids are running around. Had 2 glasses of wine before. So I did. And I knew I was going into it like, okay, I need to own my body, my, sexuality, and like my husband's here. This is good for my kids to see. And I had no problem in that moment, just like letting go of the thoughts of what other people were going to think of me. And I literally want to cry when I look at the images because I was like, that's who I am when I'm not caring what other people think. And what I'm like not trying to live into like a title or a job description. And I was like, oh gosh, I want to post them all. But yeah, that's stage 2.
Yeah. And I hope you do post one.
And then I was like, okay, I'm working up to posting the second one where it's like, showing more of my body. And I'm like trying to like get that courage to just, not care what other people think, but really do that for me, because it's like, for so long, I've lived into, I'm sure you know what archetypes are, and I've lived into this archetype, and I'm like ready to just branch out and like be fully me. So I love that you encourage women to do that. So.
Yeah. And I think it's important to distinguish, like, it's not like you posting that photo is like you're walking into every session with a client being like, here's my photo shoot that I did. Like, I think that's literally what people think is happening. Like when I post like a, sexy photo in a bathing suit or something, or even a non-sexy photo in my bathing suit, literally just a photo of my body, a photo that happens to have my body in it, that people are like, this is so unprofessional. Like, what would you do if your client saw this? And I'm like, I'd explain to my clients that I have a body. And like, yeah.
And it's like, that it goes back to like this impression that therapists should not have a body, and it's like, well, it's ridiculous. We're women. Like, we need to be okay with like whatever body we have. And oh girl, I could go on about that. You're giving me you're encouraging me to post that dang picture. So yeah.
Good.
I'm gonna do it. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about anxiety, because you shared about it on your podcast, and it's definitely something I'm open about, having anxiety. And I'm so passionate now about helping women because I feel like it's such a rampant thing with women. How do you treat anxiety? What are some of the things that you have seen work the best in your therapy and maybe even in yourself?
I think it's so difficult. It really like depends on what the anxiety is from and like what the anxiety looks like. For me, I'll share a quite relevant example of dealing with anxiety. on social media. For myself, I did a post that was, more politically focused, and I knew I was going to have comments that were going to be a little bit stressful, and felt like, okay, I think like I have, the energy to do this. And then when I was actually met with it, all this anxiety flooded in, and I was just like, oh my God, like just felt so incredibly anxious and like so many feelings. And to cope with that, I like sat down and really thought about what my emotional boundaries were. And I think that discussing boundaries around anxiety can be really helpful, because I think oftentimes when anxiety comes up, we are just reacting to it. And whether that's, defending ourselves, soothing ourselves, anything along those lines, I think can kind of take away from that healing and really just kind of like fuel it. So the boundaries piece, I think, is super helpful. I think also working on this kind of practice of being the observer of your feelings, as opposed to really overly identifying with your feelings. So saying like, I am feeling anxious versus saying I'm anxious. And I think that it's hard, because often a feeling that can be so intense, like anxiety, can really just get straight to the front and be a real like driving force for us. And I use this analogy of like, think about this. So you're like in the car, right? And like all your feelings are kind of like in the back seat, of letting them stay in the back seat. Like when anxiety comes up, is that anxiety jumping from the back seat and all of a sudden in the driver's seat, and you are now, in the back seat or in the passenger seat? Like, make sure that you can still be in the driver's seat and recognize and say, practice that mindfulness and say, yeah, I am feeling anxious right now. Like that's anxiety coming in, as opposed to just being like, oh my God, I'm so anxious. I'm really, really anxious right now. Like I gotta do this. I gotta do that. Like I'm super anxious. Like I need to soothe this, and just working to act immediately to try to reduce it. Sometimes that's even like, I just need to have a glass of wine. I just need to have a glass of wine. Like I'm just so anxious right now. And that's really anxiety getting in the driver's seat there. So I think that distinction of like, that really it's just mindfulness, I guess, that you're practicing, where you become more the observer of your feelings than you are like identifying with them as who you are and as your state of being.
Right.
Because sometimes those feelings come in and they're, like a evolutionarily like biological signifier to something that, like maybe actually we in modern society don't need to freak out about, like, I can't think of an example off the top of my head now, but I think it's important to just take that first step to recognizing like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what you're feeling right now, which again takes a certain level of emotional intelligence to even be able to stop and say that, because I think for most people it is just that anxiety is straight in the driver's seat and you're just like, you got no clue where you're going. Like, you don't know if you're going left, if you're going right. You're just along for the ride. And I think it's a really powerful step when you take back over that driver's seat and are able to say, like, this is where I'm going to go with this anxiety. Like, I'm going to, call my friends, or I'm going to, take a nice bath, or, I'm just going to sit in this and, see how this passes kind of thing. So,
I think anxiety can be a messenger. I think it can be, for me, it's usually like a red flag that I'm like imbalanced in some area of my life that needs a little bit more attention. Maybe it's rest, maybe it's eating better, maybe it's making time for myself. But usually it's like, okay, this is a sign that I need to reprioritize things, or simply like what you said, it's just kind of like I note it and I say, oh, wow, yep, this is anxiety in my body. This is what happens in these situations. I get anxious. It doesn't mean that I'm dying. It doesn't mean that, whatever the stimulus and the fear is. It means that this is how my body reacts sometimes to these situations. And the more I can do that, the more I can just stay in the driver's seat and not let it take over. But yeah, sometimes it still takes over.
Yeah. Sometimes it totally does. And it's like, again, even though you're aware of, the skills and the tools to be able to handle these things, doesn't mean that 100% of the time in every situation that you're going to ace that.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's where we have to be so compassionate with ourselves and so gentle with ourselves, because shit gets hard sometimes, and sometimes it does just take over. And I think it's okay to then take a step and say like, oh shit, like that anxiety really was just driving me. And now I, went back to that ex that I shouldn't be talking to, or I, drank that whole bottle of wine or whatever it is, and being like, yeah, wow, I was really trying to like soothe myself there. And, next time I think I want to try this instead.
Yeah. And I mean, even just this morning, I woke up and I was like immediately bombarded with like, I checked my phone, I checked Instagram, I checked emails. I kind of like did everything wrong. And then my husband started telling me about like some bill and like transferring money. And I'm like, I just literally got, heightened. And then, yeah, obviously, kids throw that in the mix. It's like, fuel on a fire. And like, so we have kids everywhere, and it's like, okay, calm down and breathe. I realized I was just like, I was operating from a place of scarcity and like not gratitude at all, which I've talked about before I don't know if I've talked about it on my podcast actually, but I started a whole group called Grow with Gratitude because it helps so much with my anxiety. And I was like, oh, I am not in a place of gratitude right now. So I literally did like an energy clearing exercise. And I tapped back into the place of fullness. That's for me what gratitude is like looking at what I actually have. And then placing value on that, and in turn, hoping that all those other areas will grow. And so I wanted to know your thoughts on gratitude, because I'm super fascinated with the topic and how it relates to, anxiety, and how you can actually grow in the areas of your life that you want to grow in, whether it's business or social media or relationships. How do you view gratitude?
Yeah, I think gratitude can be an amazing tool to use. I actually just recently did an episode on my podcast around positive psychology. And in that, we talked a little bit about gratitude. And one thing, that I already kind of knew, but really was just like solidified in that episode, was about how our brains like just naturally kind of focus on the negative things and the things that are stressing ourselves out, and how natural like ruminating on things can come. And that part is just so sad to me. Yeah. And I think that the piece of gratitude and of, thinking positively or something along those lines, I think the part that is so difficult about focusing on that is that it actually requires us to like be vulnerable, which is super, super scary to do. And it means that we then have things to like risk, that we have things to lose. And then oftentimes we just get focused on that piece that, oh my God, like, yeah, I'm grateful for this, but like, oh, what if I lose that? Like, okay, I don't want to sit in that joy or in that gratitude for too long, because I might, I might lose that, and that would be terrible. So I'm just going to like mentally and emotionally like prepare myself like what that would be like if I lost that feeling or if I lost that thing. Because that, oh my God, that would just be terrible. And then your brain just kind of focuses on that. Mm-hmm. And that's what Brene Brown would call foreboding joy, as a way to, to be like an armor against vulnerability. And, I think, again, kind of at the core even of practicing gratitude, we have to have a belief and a sense of worth and value that we deserve these things, that we're worthy of these things, that, to be grateful for, say, your promotion at work. Are you really able to sit in that and be like, I am really grateful for this because this is so positive and I worked so hard for this? Or are thoughts coming in that are like, yeah, like, I don't know if you really do deserve this. Like, you should maybe be in this kind of a position.
Mm.
Like, maybe it's the fact that, one of the issues I've worked with clients on the past in is the fact that, like, they're a woman of color in a workplace of all white men, and having this like self-doubt of like, do I really belong here? Like, okay, like, yes, this is a good move, but like, I don't know if I can really focus on being grateful for this. And there's so many layers that come in to gratitude, I think, that can make it a really vulnerable, risky place to be. But I think when you reach that place where you value yourself, you understand your worth, it's not conditional on things like, once I lose 10 pounds, once I get this degree, once I am married, once I have kids, whatever, that then you're able to really actually access that gratitude and sit in that and feel that joy that comes from gratitude, because that can be super relieving when it comes to things like anxiety. And I want to be careful, and this is kind of what I talked to you a little bit about before we started recording. I think sometimes gratitude can be used to like minimize and invalidate anxiety or difficult feelings. And, I'll take the example even of social media being a quote unquote influencer, that there's a lot of a fuck ton of anxiety that comes along with that. But then oftentimes people start to feel slightly guilty by saying that, because they realize it's something that people work really hard for and that people want, and that they're able to make money from it. And so then they immediately negate that anxiety with, but I'm really, really grateful, because this is really great. And I'm really thankful that I have the opportunity and the privilege to do this. And I think it's so important that like we hold both. And here I am going back to, holding two things at the same time, that I think is so hard for us to do. And again, in my head, I'm just like, well, I'm Black and I'm white, and so I'm all these other things too. And it just comes naturally. Yes. But I think being able to hold, yes, this is really stressful and super like creates a lot of anxiety for me. Like, and I can see the positives where I am grateful for these things. The experience, for example, of me going on the show was literally traumatic. Like literally the probably one of the most significant areas of trauma that I've had in my life. And obviously not to say that it hasn't created a lot of positive things out of that. And that's kind of just like the difficult thing of life sometimes, right? Is that not everything comes to us just as like this really neat package or this really neat, beautiful little cake. Like in making that cake, there was flour spilled and there were eggshells in the mix you had to take out and all these things, right? There was like that extra little batter that got on like the side of the pan because you didn't pour it in there perfectly. Like there's all these other bits and pieces that come with it. It doesn't just come out as this like beautiful cake. And I think that's kind of how I look at life and with dealing with difficult feelings like anxiety and holding that gratitude with it, because both can be true. And I think we have to be really careful about not invalidating our anxiety or our trauma or our stress around something and just covering it up with gratitude. I think being able to hold both and being able to really sit in that gratitude can be really helpful. That was a super long explanation, but I hope it made
wow. Yeah. So I'm just going to ask you, do you regret going on The Bachelor or Bachelor in Paradise?
I don't. I think it's almost like I just picture myself like literally in the middle of like a dirt road, right? And like looking down two different paths. And when the opportunity to go on the show came up, I literally had two paths. Like I could go and I could have this experience in the complete unknown and, hand over all control and struggle and deal with a lot of anxiety, and parts of that were exciting and, seemed really tempting. And there was curiosity. There was so much curiosity down this path. And so much of the unknown. And then to my right, there was this other path of, continuing down the path I had been on of, doing my bachelor's in 3 years in psychology, going straight from that into my master's, finishing that in 2 years, and then wanting to be fully licensed as a therapist by the age of 25. That was my track. That was my goal. Like, literally finished my program, and I was 22 years old, and going down that path, some unknown, but mostly like this stability and just kind of the same. There was still excitement in that, but I really just felt like, if there's any time in my life where I get to do something crazy and out there and it's, societally acceptable at this age, like now is really the time. And I would really always look back and wonder what my life would have been like if I didn't do it. And certainly there are still days and times where I look back and I think, what if I had never gone on? Like, where would my life be now? And there's certainly a sense of like romanticizing that happens around that, just because I think sometimes it can be really stressful. And I do still struggle with resentment and sometimes shame around being on the show and just the trauma from both times. But I don't regret it, because I did learn so much about myself, and, it's introduced me to some of like my favorite people in the world. Like Vanessa is my best friend. She is like, basically my sister at this point. And I can't imagine my life without someone like her in it. And, I think what's been so important to my life and what I value so much is personal work, and doing that work to me is so exciting. And I feel like it's super valuable. And, most people really value that in their 20s. They see that as the time to do that. And so to me, I'm like, I had the ultimate experience. Like, literally my decision in going on the show was like, I'm going to dare greatly and I'm going to go be vulnerable and like hella vulnerability hangover, like the biggest vulnerability hangover ever.
Oh my God.
Vulnerability hangovers. I have those frequently.
Yes. All the time. But I feel like, in a way, I'm able to experience gratitude around it, because it's shown me my resilience. It's shown me my strength. It's shown me my weaknesses. It's awakened my eyes to some of my patterns, to some of my blind spots. And as difficult as those things are, and as much as I'm like, I don't want to fucking look at that. Like, don't like, no, like I'm tired. Like, I like myself how I am. Like, stop. Like, I don't want to look at this stuff. In the same hand, it's very valuable, and I love doing it. And, it's,
I love that you said you followed your curiosity, because I literally just wrote something about how you can follow your curiosity to find your passion. And it gave words to, like, I feel like how I found my calling and passion, because I literally am the type of person that just follows their curiosity a lot. And I used to think it was a negative thing. And now I no longer think that. I thought, wow, that job that I hated, like, taught me so much about myself, or that workplace, and following your curiosity, it can teach you so much about yourself and what you truly are passionate about. So what would you say to someone listening right now who is, curious about making this jump to, like, maybe pivot careers, or like, maybe they want to start a social media and grow a following, or maybe they want to do counseling, maybe whatever it is. Like, what would you say to someone right now to encourage them about that?
Yeah. Well, first, I would ask yourself why. Like, that why, I think, is super important. And once you know that why, stick to that. Like if that why for you feels authentic and it feels in alignment with what you want out of life and a way for you to challenge yourself. And even if it's like scary, then make that decision and go for it. I think I've actually recently, I think like my third most recent post actually touched on this, where I was talking about like making decisions and going for them and like having, a belief in yourself that you can do these things. And for me, it's like, you just need to make the decision and then stick with it. Like, don't go back and think, oh, well, maybe actually it is safer to stay, in my full-time position, or maybe it is safer to go down this career path, or to stay in this relationship. Don't go back and doubt yourself. Like, once you've made the decision that this is what you want and this is what you want to go for, and these are the reasons why, then just go for it. Like, once I started down that path of going through casting and, doing these interviews and whatnot, like once I was down that, I was like, if this goes through, this is happening.
Wow.
I wasn't looking back at that point and being like, well, actually I might just like not do this anymore. And like, let me just like work on these other things. I was like, no, once I made the decision and committed to even doing the interviews and, going down for the casting and whatnot, it was like, okay, this is where I'm going. This is the decision I'm making, and I'm really going to stick to it.
I love that. Thank you so much for your words of encouragement and wisdom, and just sharing your story with me and all the Sure Babe listeners. And is there tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah. Well, first I have Instagram, which I've already talked a little bit about, and it's a fun time on there, guys. You can follow me there at Taymocha, which is Taymocha. And I always have to clarify this for people because they think I'm Taymocha because I'm brown, which is not the case. I'm Taymocha because my first cat's name was Mocha Joe, and I'm like a crazy cat lady, and like combined our names together. So my nickname was Taymocha.
Love it.
Second, people can also find me on my podcast, Let's Talk About It with Taylor Nolan. And I also share that on Instagram as well. So Instagram is probably the best place to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Taylor, for being here with me.
Yeah, thank you. This has been amazing. I love being able to talk about this kind of stuff, and hopefully it's beneficial to everyone that's listened. And I love the fact that you shared some of your story too. It's been really awesome to chat with you and get to know you a little bit too.
Thank you.
All right, that was a wrap on my very first Bachelor Nation guest, Taylor Nolan. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I was so excited to hear her backstory, and just honored that she was so vulnerable and sharing about the trauma she went through after the show, and how she really found her voice and her authentic self, and she started to own that instead of being worried about what people would think of her. She wanted to own herself, because that's way better than being disliked for someone you're not. So I love how she put that. Somehow it took a little bit of fear out of things for me. So I hope it did the same for you. And I wanted to let you know that I will be educating, starting October 28th, I will be posting in my Facebook group and on my Facebook page, Chrissy Powers. I am going to be talking all about finding your voice and your passion and how to monetize that. I'm going to be talking about gratitude and growing in your life with gratitude. I will be talking about goals, how to reassess them, how to know if starting a business is right for you. You name it, we're covering it. How to also have a, balanced life while life is crazy and busy at home, because I know a lot of you guys are parents listening. So yes, I think that everyone could get something out of the stuff that I am talking about starting October 28th in my Facebook page. It's just Chrissy Powers. You can find me there. If you're interested in my Grow with Gratitude stuff, you can find that group on Facebook as well, and I will let you in, and I'll be posting all my videos to that group as well. So please join me starting October 28th. It's totally free. I'm just going to be pouring into you guys because I really, truly want to help you live the life that you want to live. Not that you think you should live, not that you grew up believing that you had to live, but the life you want to live. So please find me on Facebook and look out for all of the good freebies I have coming up. Thank you guys so much for listening. Your time is so precious. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So much grace and gratitude to you.